Thank you very, very much for the introductory comments. Now I'd like to open it up to the audience for questions. So let's go ahead and start, and I'll go around as much as I can. That was the first hand I saw right there.
We didn't talk about it, but I'd sure like to hear your thoughts looking at the crystal ball on actual denuclearization of North Korea.
Well, there's an easy question.
Did everybody hear that question? Why don't you go ahead and repeat it?
I think that denuclearization has come to mean a lot of different things to a lot of people. But to sort of simplify this, I think what we're thinking of is producing a situation where we do not feel threatened by North Korea. There's not a hostile relationship between the North and the South, and we have an idea of what the nuclear infrastructure is, that it's not getting bigger, and we have confidence that we know what is going on there, is something to aim at. Now, the United States has attempted this already several times. There have been several previous agreements with North Korea. We do have a stable of experts who know a great deal about nuclear technology, who have actually been to North Korea, have negotiated with them in the past. So in this undertaking, we have some assets and we have some eager allies. The South Koreans being the most important since they share the peninsula there, but there's also Japan. Everyone who lives in the Asian region is touched by what's going on with North Korea. So I would say that I am moderately optimistic that we'll get a process of discussion going, although we're certainly not there yet, and that if we really work at it and we're realistic about how difficult a process this is and how important it is that we have, very strong verification, that we really bring in all the experts, that we really knuckle down and work this, then I think I would say I'm sort of moderately optimistic that we can get this going.
Why don't you talk a little about the downsides, though?
Okay.
Unprepared.
Okay. Downsides. The North Koreans have made a lot of promises in the past and broken them. That's the biggest downside. Can't trust them. Actually their main goal is that the current regime remain in power, and they view us as a threat to that. And then finally, there's, because we're talking about a nuclear agreement here, they're going to watch very closely what happens with the Iran agreement. And in the case of the Iran agreement, we know that the president doesn't really like it and doesn't think that it provides enough benefits to the United States. If we walk away from that agreement, however, then the North Koreans are going to say, well, what does that mean for us? So those are some challenges that we're going to have to be very conscious of going into this.
Okay, thank you very much. That was the second hand I saw right there.
Appreciate it. Thank you, Ambassador Naj. And thank you for y'all's presentation. My name is Ries Khan. I'm with the Center of Global Understanding and the Regional Director at Vista College. So my question is about trade with China. Now, we have increased the imports, the tariffs on aluminum and steel from China. And China, on the other hand, and by the way, I'm all about manufacturing within the United States. It creates jobs, economic development. I'm happy for that. Now, China, on the other hand, has said that it's going to increase tariffs on a lot of commodities being exported from the United States to China, including products like soybean or sorghum. In fact, coming from living in West Texas, with having a lot of friends who are farmers, it seems like it's going to be pretty difficult for them. That's what we hear in the media. Now, my question would be, how impactful is it for our farmers here? And is there some kind of a middle ground that leadership of both the countries, as far as this goes, can they envision such a middle ground?
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yep, very good question. First, there's no question that China has been carrying out a number of unfair trade practices for a number of years. They have also been stealing people's intellectual property rights. They've been forcing people to hand over their sort of the keys to their intellectual part of their factories if they want to invest in China. They've been investing a lot of money in their own companies, subsidizing production so they can sell internationally at lower prices, and that's what happened with steel. They tremendously grew their steel productive capacity way beyond what they needed at home, and so they sold it at a low price around the world. And let me just go through these in sort of order. First, on steel, we'd already, before this administration, practically all steel from China was already facing U.S. tariffs. So only 3% of our imports were actually Chinese steel when we put announced these new tariffs. So it's actually countries other than China that we will be hitting with new tariffs on aluminum and steel if we put them in place. Secondly, we announced a whole second wave of tariffs aimed at their intellectual property theft. That's what they responded to with the massive counter tariffs that they've announced. Now, nobody's applied these tariffs yet. We're all sort of in the verbal volleys back and forth going on. And then let me say the farmers. You're right, the farmers should be worried because the Chinese are pretty astute people, and so they're going to target places that it's going to hurt in the United States, and that will be farmers. And for the farmers, it's a triple hit because the two other countries we're negotiating with, Mexico and Canada, are the other two largest agricultural export markets that the United States has. So this could end up being very costly to farmers if not handled very well, if we don't get an NAFTA agreement and if we get into a trade war with China. The key thing with China is to find a strategy that will get their attention, that will also bring other trading partners together to demand changes, and will not lead us down a really destructive, costly path for everybody. I hope we get there. It's not clear to me yet that we're there. We're still in the time of getting each other's attention. So what we need to do now is actually engage in a serious negotiation and decide what we need to get out of that negotiation as far as concrete commitments by the Chinese to not pull the trigger or to fire another volley. So it is a situation where we are playing with people's livelihoods. It is playing with fire. And we have to hope that those making these decisions actually have a well-calculated strategy to create enough pressure but not to cause those damages. So what you've been reading about, in fact, is everybody worried about, do they really have that strategy, and is it well tuned enough to avoid the big costs that would come if we do abruptly cut off in both directions very important trade. And it's not only farmers, it's Boeing aircraft, it's all sorts of other manufacturers too that would lose because we have a very large trade with China right now. But again, to reiterate, there's no question there are things that need to be fixed, really serious problems in the way China's been behaving in international commerce.
Thank you very much. I wish we could do this for 2 hours, but we're going to be moving very, very quickly. You had one, I think. Yeah, no.
I'd just like to make a comment and get your response back. As a farmer who raises grain and who raises fruit, we're at a serious disadvantage to the old NAFTA. We sell grain to Canada. It's a 10% tariff on us. They sell grain to us, it's not. Same with cattle. Same thing with China. They've blocked a lot of our imports of beef, which affects us significantly, and apples and so forth. A lot of this is politicized. I just came back from the Midwest. The farmers are solidly behind what Trump is doing, I believe. A lot of politicization is taking place. Hopefully, they'll let the course run, and just like your thoughts on what you think is going to shake out of this.
Thank you.
Well, I think that if we had NAFTA, Texas beef's going to face 25% tariffs going into Mexico, which it doesn't face right now. Already last year in Mexico, they increased their purchases 900% from Brazil of grains and soybeans because they were worried about the U.S. market. So I think the best thing is to quickly renegotiate a modern NAFTA to secure our two largest clients in the world. The people who buy the most from us are Mexico and Canada. And that should be really the highest priority. And then I think the farmers do need to be reassured vis-a-vis China. And there are ways you can do that. But it needs to be clearly communicated, and there needs to be a clear strategy for doing that. That's what I think. And I think farmers know where their livelihood comes from, and as you know, if you're a farmer, it's at many times very precarious. You're dependent on your buyers. So it's a very important factor in how we do this. It's going to touch a lot of people's lives. And as you said, these are people who voted Republican for a long time. And well, we'll have to see what happens.
Okay, thank you. We have time for a couple of more. Yeah, right there in the middle.
I was just curious to turn more to the Middle East. Do you guys think that we have somewhat failed to be reciprocal with the Kurds? And is there anything short of supporting them being different than how they were originally configured in Iraq that could fix that problem?
I think you want me to take that?
Oh, please.
Yeah. I've been dealing with the Iraqi Kurds on and off since 1974. I was consul in Tabriz in the West, had all the Kurdish area of the Iraq-Iran border in my consular district when they had the revolt in Iraq. And then I knew a lot of their leaders when they moved into Iran after that failed. And then I ran the Iran office after the first Gulf War, and then, like all of my colleagues, served in Iraq with special relationship to the Kurds. The Kurds in Iraq have some solid claims, but I think the first fact is a Kurdish state cannot exist and continue its existence without permanent foreign military support. Like it or don't like it, I think that's a fact. The Iraqis, the Iranians, the Kurds, and the Syrian government, all of whom have Kurds, do not want to see this state. And the Turks. Oh yeah, don't forget the Turks. So any attempt to make a state is either going to be crushed by the outside powers, or we have got a permanent military protectorate, and we don't have a reason to have that. The course that the United States has pushed on the Iraqi Kurds with indifferent success is that they can secure their future much better by remaining a major political factor within Iraq than by a fruitless quest for sovereignty. Barzani made an incredible miscalculation in going for an independence referendum against the advice of the United States, of every other allied power working in Iraq, against the advice of the Iraqi government, and frankly, against a lot of advice from within the Kurdish community from the other parties. And that's one reason that when the Iraqis moved after the referendum on Kirkuk, which is a major oil area, this is the kind of pride of what they'd taken, that his Kurdish allies didn't want to fight for him. So they've now got themselves in a little bit of a bind. I think we have a major interest in trying to pressure, work with, help the various parties not to get over this crisis and get back to business in a unitary state, which is extremely important if you're going to have resistance to the Islamic State, ISIS, that may try to come back. But I don't think we have some moral burden on the Kurds, to the Kurds, because frankly, they would have lost a war to ISIS if we hadn't intervened. So yes, we got a lot of help from them, and yes, they got a lot of help from us, but that is not a reason for us to get tangled up in a permanent military support for a state that can't survive on its own, following a policy that frankly is dumb.
Thank you. Okay, who wants the burden of asking the last question? Right back there. Sorry,
Evening.
David.
Thank you for coming. So you mentioned Lebanon, Turkey, and I'm wondering if you have an opinion on whether the new ruler in Saudi Arabia, who's made some efforts to build not a coalition, they've made some moves of conciliation with the Israelis. In Turkey, it feels like Turkey, when I was young, Turkey was a very staunch ally of the United States, felt like they had been that way for many, many years. When we went into Iraq the second time, they wouldn't let our planes fly over the airspace, and it seems like since that time, the relationship with Turkey has become more tenuous. So do you think that Saudi Arabia is capable of being a player between these peripheral powers that seem to be under the influence of the Islamic State, at least in some part, to kind of have an influence for the good on Israel's behalf? Or do you think that this is more just a new generation of Saudis looking to do business?
We've all got opinions, but I know this question is Susan's.
Well, the new Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, Mohammed bin Salman, is a very dynamic figure. He has proved to be politically very astute and wily when it comes to the internal dynamics. He has aggregated most of the power, a lot of the power in the country by bringing the military, the internal security, economics, and even a chairmanship of the oil company Aramco, which is one of the great feeders for the budget, under his purview. He has eliminated a lot of the internal dissent within the royal family, and don't forget, in Saudi Arabia, it's the family that matters. So he has been able to do that for now. We don't know how long this will hold, but for now he has done that. He has also been able to take on the business community in Saudi Arabia, who have basically had a symbiotic relationship with the ruling family, sort of, okay, you rule, we run the businesses and make things happen. Oh, by the way, we get a cut, you get a cut, and it's sort of, that's how it works. And it's been it's not exactly the American model. On the other hand, it has worked for a long time and was the understood way of how business gets done. That's not to excuse it, it's just simply to say that's how it worked. So when he went after these individuals, the question was, is he doing it because he's routing out corruption? Well, the youth in the country certainly think that. Is he doing it because it also serves his purposes by making sure that anybody with great power or wealth that could challenge him when he decides that he would like to become king is going to then not be able to be in the position to challenge him? Well, there would be those who would say, yes, he's also trying to eliminate any dissent. So the question becomes, how does he keep a hold on his power in Saudi Arabia? Part of it has been to create alliances outside of Saudi Arabia, and he was very astute. The first alliance that he needed to make was with the new Trump administration, and he went about that very assiduously before Trump was even in the White House, sending his envoys to Trump Tower to meet with the incoming administration. And he has allies in the region, but he also has enemies in the region. His agenda in terms of working with our government they think alike in terms of wanting to take a firmer stand against Iran. The Iran deal under the Obama administration was an anathema to all of Saudi Arabia, not just MBS, and actually to most of the Gulf states, because they saw that as basically giving Iran a freer hand for malign activities in the region. So this was a problem, but he will be a player. Will he be able to work the Israeli-Palestinian issue from the outside in, which is the new terminology that Jared Kushner and others in the White House are talking about when they talk about this? Possibly, but I think doubtful. Because I think at the end of the day, there are going to be too many elements that cannot, will not stand for this issue to be totally sold in this way. That said, will there be more of an opening between the Gulf states and Israel? Potentially, yes. If there were peace, they'd be trading tomorrow. There's no question. And as you know, many of these countries, like in Oman, in Qatar, they had trade offices there. In fact, there was an envoy who was there who routinely was going in and out for business purposes with the idea that eventually there would be peace. But right now, you know, I think it's very difficult for even people in Saudi Arabia to say that the third holiest place in Islam, which is Jerusalem, and the holy mosques that are very important in their religion and in their cultural life could be traded away in a way that doesn't guarantee their own religious and political beliefs. So I think while our administration will look at ways to try and bring these folks to the table and try and give top cover to individuals who want to negotiate for peace, and that's fine, but it won't be at the price of selling out an issue that has held sway over political legitimacy in the region for the last 70 years.
Thank you very much. And ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for coming out. And please thank our magnificent panel.